Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Today, the state of our economy is laid bare. Growth has flatlined, just 0.1% in August. Inflation remains almost twice the Bank of England's target, and long-term borrowing costs are at their highest since 1998. Now, when we left office back in July 2024, unemployment was at we had the fastest growing economy in the G7. A year later, unemployment is up, debt is at its highest since the 1960s, and the UK is sliding backwards. It's hardly surprising from a government with more experience in the trade union movement than in business. And so only the Conservatives are serious about the economy. The government, I've literally only been speaking for 30 seconds, so I think you can bear with me for a minute or two more. The government's inexperience shows in its policies that they pursue, policies that make it harder for businesses, harder for homeowners, and harder for first-time buyers to thrive. And now, just weeks before the Chancellor's budget, comes the most destructive raid on homeowners in living memory, if we are to believe the leaked reports coming out of the Treasury. I will give way.
Thank you. Under the Conservatives' watch, the Conservative Party grew the national debt by nearly £1 trillion. You drove our economy through a hard Brexit into the ground, and yet you are the Conservative Party is masquerading as a party of good sense in the economy. I do not understand how that makes sense. Please, can you explain?
COVID, war in Ukraine.
I mean, there's been a lot of comments about when people were born, so what they remember, but I hope the honourable member doesn't take offence. I'm sure he was born during COVID and during the war in Ukraine, and so knows why we had to increase the national debt to do it. And he is being entirely disingenuous if he believes that those things did not have an impact on the economy. And if he didn't, if he had been in power, what would he have done? Would he have not supported those small businesses? Would he have not supported employers? Would he have not supported the hard-working people? Now, I think I've already heard enough of him from today so far, so I won't give way for the moment.
Just to be clear, good language is appropriate, and we're not sure that disingenuous is the best language to use. I'm sure they'll find an alternative word. Mr. Stafford, are you finished wandering around the chamber? Are you comfortable now? Fabulous. Mr. Stafford.
Of course, I misspoke and I withdraw that comment, but I do find it very strange that members of the Liberal Democrat Party seem to have collective amnesia on what happened over the last few years. Now, returning to the substance of this, families across my constituency are bracing for new taxes on homes, capital gains tax on family houses, and even potentially a land value tax. This is not reform, it's a sledgehammer aimed at aspiration, mobility and stability. And as I've said before, in Farnham, where the average home now costs £660,000, families could face bills of £5,000 a year on top of their mortgage and energy costs. In Hazelmere, Liphook and Borden, already stretched households will be hit again. And pensioners in Greyshot or Tilford face the grotesque prospect of a capital gains on the homes they've worked a lifetime to own. Everyone, pensioners, farmers, small business owners, is treated by this government as a cash cow. Yeah. A tax on the family home is a tax on aspiration. It traps people in their properties, it dries up supply and breaks housing chains. The very people Labour claim to champion, first-time buyers, will be frozen out altogether. The government claims this is about fairness, and we've heard this from a number of government speakers this afternoon. But there's nothing fair about a pensioner in Gretham being forced to sell their home to pay the taxman, or a young family in Linford choosing between childcare and a new annual levy. That's not fairness, it's a regional punishment for those of us who just happen to live in the south and southeast. So that is why I back our clear Conservative plan to abolish stamp duty on primary residences. Owning a home gives people a real stake in their community and their country. Our policy will make the economy stronger and help families achieve the dream of home ownership once again. I will.
Honourable member for giving way. He says that owning a home gives people a stake in their community, and I agree with him. Why then does his party oppose this government's moves to help build 1.5 million homes and reform the planning system?
Well, the simple answer is we don't. So I can't add more than that. Where we do have a problem, as he's drawn me on this, is one, we don't think it's anywhere going to be deliverable, and because the government is not meeting any of its targets thus far. And where from a parochial point of view, where in Waverley and East Waverley and East Hampshire, my constituents are facing a doubling of the housing targets. In London, where the infrastructure is already in place, the targets are actually being reduced. That is not joined-up thinking. That is a government that is spraying its house targets all over the country without thinking about how it's actually going to deliver. So on stamp duty, as I said earlier, an average price of a family home in Farnham is £660,000, which means that they would be paying £23,000 in stamp duty. That's an enormous cut if we can get this through. And it's fully funded, most importantly, part of that £47 billion saving plan, consistent with our golden rule that every pound saved is split between reducing the deficit and growing the economy. The Institute for Fiscal Studies calls stamp duty, I quote, the most economically damaging tax in the UK. The London School of Economics found it, and I quote, cuts mobility and investment. The Centre for Policy Studies calls it, again I quote, a tax on aspiration. They are all right. Our plan will save first-time buyers up to £18,000 in London, £4,000 in the South East. And as my right honourable friend for South Northamptonshire said, combined with our first jobs bonus, a young couple could save £28,000, enough to get on the ladder and build a future. Now, we've heard a number of honourable members on all sides of the House claiming that they support the principle of removing the stamp duty land tax. Notable exceptions being the members for Pendle and Clitheroe, Welwyn Hatfield and North Warwickshire. But the point that those three members forget is that buying a house almost always is in a chain. So just because someone at the top of the market might be buying, and I think they're being a little overreaching with £2 million, but even if it were a £2 million house, everybody else down that chain benefits, because as soon as you can get the market moving, you will allow people to buy and to sell and to get the youngest people, those who are buying their first home or trying to upsize because they're starting a family, the ability to actually buy. So it's not just those people who are technically covered by the tax, it is everybody within that whole chain. And by contrast, Madam Deputy Speaker, Labour froze the thresholds, dragging more families into higher bands. And even their Housing Secretary tried to block 237 homes in his own constituency. Build, baby, build? I think not, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now, as I said, a number of members across the House, especially on the Labour benches, have expressed sympathy for the principle of the policy. But they seem entirely unwilling to make the tough decisions to get there. And we saw that with their total inability to cut the welfare bill by a tiny amount earlier this year. But even if they were not willing to take those decisions, as every single member of this House knows, this motion is not binding on the government. So they could happily support it to show that in principle they would like to see this tax cut. But I suspect that when their principles will be overridden by the decisions of the Whip's office. And the Liberal Democrats were characteristically fence-sitting. I mean, so much so that I think the honourable members from St Albans must have left to remove the splinters. The reality is, the Conservative Party, this opposition, is the only one with the serious thinking about how we can get the housing market moving again. Our alternative, Madam Deputy Speaker, is clear. We will abolish stamp duty on main homes, scrap business rates for hospitality, leisure and retail, and give high streets the breathing space to grow again. That is the difference. We listen to people who build, who hire, who own and who aspire. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, the choice before the House is stark. A Labour Party that punishes aspiration or a Conservative Party that rewards it. A government that traps people where they are or one that sets them free to move, work and grow. Only the Conservatives have a serious plan to get Britain working, grow the economy and give every person a real stake in their community through the security of home ownership.